Cool.
Hey everyone. We just had to Mickey Mouse's audio setup, so I hope that down the back you can hear me. I'm just shouting at my laptop at the moment. It's great to be here at our first OzSecCon, and this is the tale of an extremely scope-limited physical security job that this small bearded man and I did, and some of the rather surprising things that we achieved and that we learned from this job. You may remember Jet yesterday mentioned that one of the 2 times that she's been busted doing physical red teaming was when the client hamstrung the job by completely narrowing the scope. Yeah, that happens to us too.
Next slide. There we go.
Oh,
Excellent. So I'm David, and some people would just argue that I am a small bearded child. In fact, about 3 people have come up and asked me if I need help finding my dad. So if you've seen him and you could let me know, then I'd appreciate that. I'm a bit lost here. And this jolly gentleman here is Logan. Hello. Glad to be here. So we're both security consultants, and we have varying degrees of incompetence, misconstrued for experience in doing these kinds of engagements, but particularly on the offensive side.
We work for an awesome little, totally not ruled by corporate overlord company based mainly out of New Zealand called Aura Information Security. Hey, we're on the badge, including our corporate overlord's name. And we do all kinds of different security testing, web application external reviews, and a growing line in physical security testing and social engineering.
So first things first, don't try this at home. Being authorized to do this kind of thing is really important. If you are somewhere you're not supposed to be, doing something you're not supposed to be doing, then it's a quick way to get really well acquainted with some extremely high-end security controls in a very small studio apartment that you only get to leave for exercise once a day.
So if you don't have a letter of authorization tucked in your pocket, please don't go using anything that we talk about this morning. We had this slide yesterday after watching Jack's talk. It turns out that organizations, whether they're in Wellington or Ontario or wherever, are doing some pretty similar bad physical security stuff. We just did it really badly and it still worked. So there's a lot of similar themes in these talks.
And generally speaking, pretty much every job that we do is covered by an NDA, and in fact most of our customers prefer that we don't even reveal that we do work for them. Yeah.
And some of the jobs, especially where more sensitive information is involved, they get another explicit NDA on top of the one we already have. Because if I was going to reveal all your physical security problems to the world at a conference in Melbourne, because you only gave me one NDA, then a second NDA is going to stop me. The long and short of this is that we obviously can't mention clients specifically, and if we accidentally do slip the client's name, then please pretend we didn't, and we'll totally get that one blanked out of the recording.
It was the GCSB! Stuff the NDAs! Nobody reads those anyway! But yeah, just kidding, it wasn't the GCSB. Also a good way, blaming that out, to spend a lot of time in a small room. GCSB, if you aren't aware, are the New Zealand equivalent of the GCIO or the NSA, so they're the dudes who do the hackery things for the government. And they're not really a household name unless you happen to live with Kim.com. So this target organisation is a household name. They're fairly well known within New Zealand, and they're a pretty large one. They have about 6,000 sheep, a few hobbits, and a couple of managers.
But really, somewhere in the ballpark of roughly 1,000 staff. They have a lot of contractors. They have a lot of they have just all the managed service providers all battling for their attention. And they are actually a somewhat well-known name in New Zealand. They wanted some physical security testing done because they have this kind of golden goose. Think 12 herbs and spices meets the GDPR. And they didn't want anyone to just go and take it for an unauthorized walk.
So typically an organisation goes looking for physical security assessments when they're fairly comfortable with the level of security they have around their networks, their applications and their hosts. They've got a bunch of firewalls, they've got 17 different acronyms bought from 23 different vendors. They've got 6 antiviruses fighting for control of each of their hosts, and they've applied so much lockdown that it's pretty hard to just use their system anyway. And of course they've got the token McAfee branded kitchen sink thrown in for good luck.
So at this point, for grow of these organizations, traditional hacking might be kind of hard. So attackers will actually just try stealing the entire goose directly from its cage, or even the cage as well, rather than attacking systems relating to it. And this becomes viable when either physical security controls just haven't been implemented at all, or they've put some physical security controls in, but they've implemented them really poorly. And I mean, if you look at this example here, like you just cut the zip tie off the chain, and then you use it to pick the sweet master lock. This is a case of like stacking bad security controls on top of even worse ones and being like, security, yeah. The other factor for these organizations is that not only will their staff click on misspelled phishing links sent to them, they'll also actively bypass physical security controls. They'll wedge doors open and they'll let people in and they'll do all sorts of insane stuff. Or actually actively assist attackers in getting into their organizations. And usually it's not really a fault of the individual, it's because they haven't received any training that helps them to buy into these controls, and they don't really feel empowered to do anything about if they see these things not happening well.
And so another key weakness that Jake touched a bit on yesterday is that often these organisations, they make flawed assumptions about the strength of the security controls they do have. They might have some fancy alarm system or a very wordy small print policy. And Jake pointed out the example yesterday of the badge, and we kind of, Matt drilled very deep down into how flawed some of those assumptions can be. A fun fact is that we work with Matt and Fish, or Tats and Fish, Fish and Tats, I don't know, Fish and Chips, call them whatever you like. So we all sit in I wouldn't call it a pod either. We sit in a bunch of desks, so you can kind of imagine the sort of the talent that we had sitting there. Where did I get to? So they might have, they might have some really nice filing cabinets that they keep their all of their golden goose egg recipes in. But we all know that ultimately, if they're relying on bad security controls, so if they've got, say, a wafer lock on their filing cabinet, then you sort of just have to gesture it add it with a tension wrench in order to get in, and all the lovely recipes will come out.
And complete physical compromise of an information system is about the worst case for the blue team. If there's any of you in the room today, give us a wave. Not only can you take virtually any action that a fully privileged electronic compromise could undertake, you can also go really low tech. You could just walk off with part of the system, or just super low tech and smash it up with a hammer in a total low denial of service.
So jump ahead of ourselves a little bit. Our target was doing PhySec fairly poorly. They had some all right technical controls, but the infosec team believed that there were a bunch of weaknesses, particularly around their staff behaviour and the enforcement of their size 4 font policies that they had.
So what did they do? They escalated it. They went to the upper management with their concerns that they were in fact not doing a good job of defending their prize goose from all kinds of misfortune. And the management response was amazing. They listened to everything the information security team had to say, and they immediately formed a plan to remedy this. They formed a working group, and then they assigned a massive budget for rectification of these issues.
Good one. That totally didn't happen either. But seriously, if you do work for an organisation that does takes security seriously, then and they invest, particularly around physical security and stuff like that, then we would love to come and do a job and totally get burnt trying to break into your offices. Unfortunately, management fell back on that time-worn favourite of we have a nice policy, we have cups with policies, and they state that we won't let a random person off the street come in and walk off with our favourite avian companion. They had a piece of paper somewhere that defined a visitor policy and some other site security policy, but all in all, several other wonderfully ineffective controls that were filed away in a SharePoint library somewhere for people to read once during their induction and then promptly forget about.
Now, as we all know, most of these policies sit about one step above those end-user license agreements that you ignore when installing software. I just ignored one a moment ago when making the audio work from my laptop. most people, they don't actually know what's in these policies, they don't know how to apply the policy, and there's actually no real disincentive for anyone that doesn't follow the policy, and the net result is you may as well not even have that policy. So the infosec team decided that they needed to have it demonstrated, primarily to upper management, just how bad the reality of things was.
Yeah, so they turned to the obvious provider of such services, a bunch of introverted, somewhat antisocial basement-dwelling nerds. Hello! But nonetheless, collectively, we have an interesting skill set when it comes to these jobs. Some of us, admittedly, mostly Logan, are reasonably handy with a set of lockpicks. And I would like to shout out the lockpicking competition that Logan is currently fighting to the death with Michael. So player 3 should enter the room, and that's you guys. But yeah, collectively we're also surprisingly good at the face-to-face interaction of stuff, and we have a myriad of capabilities in terms of attacking the types of access controls that you'd find in buildings, like the RFID things that we were looking at yesterday. And we love using these kinds of skills that we have in order to break into businesses physically.
However, the client wasn't interested in any of this. They were concerned that if we used any crazy hacker, technically advanced magic or other sneaky kind of tricks, then management would just say, it's not really a feasible threat. It's not a genuine adversary in their threat model.
So to set the scene, there's me, Logan, the account manager, sitting opposite a couple of their security dudes, and we were, ready to lay out the full cyber spectrum of our physical security bag of tricks. But instead, the conversation went a little bit like this.
Can we do some neat social engineering pretexts, complete with somewhat credible disguises, in order to bamboozle our way out?
That's probably a little bit too advanced for us at this time.
So as an aside, I'm a huge believer that if you're going to roll in with any pretext, make damn sure that you can actually deliver on that pretext. If you show up pretending to be a plumber and it just so happens that they happen to have a full-scale toilet disaster going on, you are literally in deep poo-poo. And your residential grade plumber skills are not going to cut it. And there's some pretexts that will just never be available to me. I might look a bit pregnant after a few craft beers, but I'm not convinced it'll get people to hold the door for me.
So the next question, so you have some locks and you've got some doors. Can we pick your locks, and can we clone your access cards, and can we shim your doors?
No. You may only stand forlornly outside and hope someone lets you in. Plus, we don't actually own the building we're in, so we're worried about any damage, no matter how minuscule, that you might do to those controls.
We get into a lot of places by exploiting poorly installed or low-grade door controls that provide more convenience than actual security. So, at this point in the scoping meeting, we're actually kind of sad because they were basically taking away some of our favourite toys.
Oh, how about we could pretend to be your internal IT department? We'll show up with like a keyboard and some network cables, and we'll resolve some support tickets. No. I just don't think I can sign off on that. The IT department will get really angry at me. So instead of plumbing, since as I mentioned I can't plumb, one of our frequently used pretexts is arriving as third-party IT guys. We have a fictional IT company. It's got a website, it's got business cards, and we have some nicely embroidered but ill-fitting polo shirts. And we love it when people add connections to this company on LinkedIn, because it doesn't exist. And it's even better when they endorse us for stuff. The method is usually that we'll send an email, or maybe we'll call ahead from our super helpful fictional company to maybe the reception. And then we'll rock up and do a human buffer overflow by offering to inspect their Microsoft Volume Licensing Activation Status Notification Service.
Alternatively, if the company is big enough, then you can just rock in and be like, "Hello, I'm David from IT." But that, in the hope that the receptionist or whoever it is that you're talking to doesn't actually recognise or know that you are from IT, and will just let you onto their computer to update the Windows. And this works way better if you're not at the main office, and if when you go up to reception and say, "Hi, I'm Daniel from IT. The guy standing next to you isn't actually from the real IT that's a couple of floors below you. Hey, fish.
But, of course, none of this is allowed.
So with our arsenal severely depleted, we asked one of our last and often very successful techniques. How about we stick around after all of your staff have gone home and get up to all kinds of mischief?
No, we can't allow that. It might be a health and safety issue.
True story. So often with these engagements that we do, day 3 or 4 is the working late method. We sometimes call, well, in the office we call this brown teaming, because basically what we do is we tailgate onto your floor and then we find the nearest toilet and occupy a cubicle for several hours and wait for your staff to leave. And this is a really incredible and effective way, and also very low tech, of gaining after hours access to a business. The net result, apart from usually a really numb bum, is often that you can just walk out, there's nobody on the floor, and you've got unattended access to their secure areas. Obviously this is very dependent on not having other mitigating controls like alarm systems. But if they happen to say have some cleaners on the floor, then usually the cleaners don't know who you are, and you can just rock up and be like, hey, I was in the toilet, I totally left my badge on my desk, can you let me in please? And then they'll be like, sweet, and they'll disalarm it and they'll let you in, and then they'll do their cleaning and leave, and there you are on the secure floor again. But unfortunately, this, as well as any other covert out of hours, movie hacker, balaclava, notebook sneakiness was also out of scope.
So this all seemed pretty suspicious. We were kind of left thinking, what do you actually want us to do here? Why are we being asked to do a physical security assessment and then you're taking all the meaningful testing out of scope? Were they just setting us up to fail so that they could tell management how awesome they were? And then it dawned on us that perhaps, just maybe, they genuinely were really, really ownable.
So adding to the difficulty as well was that they didn't have a whole lot of money to spend. And we pretty much always use, we always use 2 consultants for these kind of jobs, just for another person who's there alongside to bail you out if you get in a difficult situation. Say you find out that the stairwells are all card access and that the only way out of the stairwell is to walk out of a definitely alarmed fire escape door. Yeah, that didn't happen on this job. But yeah, also just having a spotter and somebody else who's familiar with the customer and the engagement and the site in case one of you gets burned and is ready to jump in is really useful. And so, this makes these engagements come somewhat expensive, and the solution for this particular engagement was to shorten the time frame drastically, and partly due to the limited scope because they stuck us there, and partly also they provided a whole lot of information around floor layouts and where things were, and so they helped us at least on a paper-based way with a lot of the recon.
It's important to note with these assessments, they're very different from a traditional pen test in that there's no expectation that we'll identify all of their vulnerabilities or even most of them. We're looking to gain access to specific items, specific areas or information, and the path of least resistance is what we'll usually go for. This makes sense. The client had given us some very specific things, mostly related to their goose, that they wanted us to attempt to achieve, and anything we could do after that was just considered a bonus.
So usually when we do these engagements, the approach is pretty standard. We've got a pretty well-written and clear-cut playbook, but we're a little bit stymied here. The planning phase is the part of the engagement that I find the most comforting. Just knowing what you're going to do and having all of that plan stored away in your mind helps sort of ease the I'm totally not supposed to be here nerves, because you're totally not supposed to be there. But this one really only took about 3 minutes. We sort of sat down with the client removing so many of our usual techniques. It was, our usual playbook just went straight out the window.
And normally we kick these things off with a pretty extensive recon phase. We'll avoid any interaction with the target's employees. We'll work out how good their controls are. We'll look at what sort of locks they're using. We'll look at their RFID technology and have a look if we have some known exploits for that. We'll identify all of the entrances and exits and how many people use those, and foot traffic at varying times of the day, and especially what the target facility's internal layout looks like. Because when you're walking into a office space that you've never been in before, it's really helpful if you have a bit of an idea of what's going on there, because then you don't just look like a lost tourist. And I will add there that interior design architects love to show off their work on their websites and then name all the images with the name of the customer, so you can find some awesome stuff on, just in Google with like the exact interior layout of some offices. But we couldn't actually use any of this. We couldn't attack their technical controls, so it didn't matter what they were using for technical controls. We couldn't do any in-depth social engineering, so researching a pretext, finding out where someone was born and how many kids they have and that sort of thing, not helpful. And last of all, they'd given us an internal floor plan, kind of turned out to be a little bit inaccurate, but it had the goose nest highlighted and circled, and so the entire recon phase just got skipped.
So we're left with pretty much the simplest and technique in our arsenal, and one that we usually keep until the end or the last day of a PhySec, once we've kind of already owned the target and we're just trying to add value for the customer. And it sort of works a bit like this. You'll just walk in, silently tailgate somebody, or even worse, if you can't tailgate somebody, you just sort of stand around and ask somebody to let you in, and then sort of wing it and see how far you can get.
So we set off on our first attempt at getting in. We were kind of pessimistic, understandably, about our chances. We're still in the mindset of, surely this won't work?
Yeah, so it went a bit like this. So I walked into the lobby and I sort of hung around a little bit waiting for a bunch of people to gather at the elevator in the hope that at least one of them was from our target company. They were a goose minder. And so I got in the elevator with a large number of people, and fortunately the floor that was the target floor with the goose nest was already selected. So I went up to the floor with the person and then walked out into their lobby, and they had some doors, so some access control outside of the lifts so that you could get onto the secure area. And then I walked slowly behind them, they badged the door, and then I followed them in and walked out straight into the kitchen.
The end. Round of applause to David. Well, not really the end. We've ticked off one objective. We've gained access to their secure area without doing anything remotely sneaky. But we needed to go and ruffle the golden feathers a little bit, to demonstrate some real impact.
The problem was that, we'd sort of expected to get busted, and we hadn't really planned on being standing in the secure area this early in the engagement. So therefore, at this stage, didn't have a great plan beyond winging it, because no pretext, remember. So I just proceeded to not suspiciously at all hightail it to the nearest meeting room, which fortunately was close by, and then give my buddy old pal Logan a call.
So being on a phone call, whether you're hiding in a meeting room or out in an open office space, it's a really powerful tool in the professional weasel's bag of tricks. It gives you a reason to be standing around in an area, like a lift lobby or something like that, while you wait for a good opportunity to tailgate someone. It's a really good shield from social interaction, because societal norms say that it's rude to interrupt someone who's on the phone. In a pinch, you can just improv it. Just pull out your phone and pretend. Sometimes this comes across as a little bit kind of, yes, Mr. President, right away, Mr. President, thank you for your call. But so our preference is to actually call one of our colleagues and just talk business. It went a bit like this.
So, hey, I'm in.
What?
Okay. I just totally tailgated this dude onto the floor. So, what do you think I should do now?
No idea. Where exactly are you?
Oh, right. Okay. So I'm hiding in the meeting room nearest to the kitchen.
I know. Go make a cup of tea. Then we'll come up with a better plan.
Okay, got it.
So tea, coffee, water, whatever, In one place, they had a freezer full of ice cream, so that was really nice. Basically, what you're exploiting is this perception that, generally speaking, nobody who's up to no good is just going to stand around in the kitchen and make a cup of tea, or choose between a trumpet and a truck bar. Suspicious people are expected to look suspicious.
You're also unlikely to be challenged if you're doing it. So even if you can't find the mugs and you right-click around all of their cupboards and somebody comes up to you and asks, hey, what's going on? You can just kind of be like, hey, where are the mugs today? I swear they used to be in here. And they'll point them out, hopefully. And the implication there is that, hey, this dude, he said that he knew where the mugs were previously, and I know that the mugs get put somewhere different every time because the cleaners don't know what they're doing. And so he's like trusted employee because why did I move the cups?
Personally, I like to grab like a newspaper or a magazine, or sometimes I'll bring a cookie from Higgins with me. And I'll just grab a spot in their tea room, and I'll spend a few minutes getting acquainted with the space. I have a bit of a subtle look around, and you just want to get a feel for the rhythm of the area, how many people are coming and going, what's the general volume level, are people having noisy conversations, whatever, and just get that feel for the space that you've just compromised. And another thing that's really important is it may help settle your nerves a bit if you've just pulled off the world's sketchiest tailgate.
So once you've got your tea and you've sat there for a while and drank half of it so you don't splash it on yourself with your hand jitters because your pretext is literally held in your hands, it's time to get up and make a move.
So pro tips, don't make eye contact. Awkward antisocial people are pretty commonplace around big offices. You can be one of them too. Just appear to be busy and trying to figure out which meeting room is due to occupy. Maybe, as I said, call your colleague, ask what meeting room you're supposed to be in, what time the meeting starts, how late they're going to be, is the AV going to work when you get there? These are all good reasons for an actual employee to not engage you in conversation.
Either that or just sip your way too hot cup of tea every couple of steps and keep it near your mouth so nobody sees you smirking. So we love holding impromptu team meetings in our target offices. Even if you're solo, generally a meeting room is somewhere that you're unlikely to be disturbed.
They often have nice bonuses for an attacker as well. They may have a live but unused network port. And if your client is using things like port security, it's more likely to be disabled in a meeting room because people are bringing in random things like land turtles. Alternatively, they might do useful things like having the password to the internal corporate Wi-Fi. That's actually from this engagement, displayed prominently on the wall for authorized visitors only, naturally.
For the most part, people generally won't disturb you or leave you to it unless they've definitely booked the meeting room. And if they have, then you can just pack up your stuff and scuttle off to somewhere else. Generally the implication again is, I've seen this guy before, and so if you happen to run into them again, then it can be helpful for building that rapport later. A phrase as simple as, "Oh, sorry, man, I thought I'd booked this," can be enough just to reinforce that illusion that you work there.
So David had ongoing, unchallenged physical access to the facility. He had a cup of tea and a meeting room. It had become pretty apparent at this point that he wasn't about to get challenged anytime soon.
But the golden eggs were as yet undisturbed, and the super effective security policy dictated that the extra secure area, the goose nest, was to be locked unless it was occupied. And with lockpicking and other bypasses out of scope, that would mean that I would have to go into one of these goose nests that was already occupied and sit down beside someone. Complicating matters was the somewhat ironic signage all over the place reminding the staff that of the security policies pertaining to all goose-related activities, but fortunately none of this mattered. So I walked around pretending I was looking for the meeting room I was trying to occupy, but really I was just trying to identify how many people were in each of the rooms and counting the legs. And I walked around and I found one that had only one person in it. So I checked the door and it was unlocked, good one. And I walked in and then sat down at the free desk that was there and set up my laptop. And there was another gentleman in the room, but he appeared to be really focused because when I sat down, he didn't turn around and say hi. He just sort of sat there and continued on doing his work, which was great for me because I didn't have to talk to him. Within a few minutes, it was very clear that he didn't give a crap that I was in there, and he was not observing the ironic signage. So I spent the next few minutes trying to figure out all of the cables for the goose-related machinery to turn that on so I could have a play around with it. And then about half an hour later, I'd taken some photos of the dude sitting next to me, of the goose machinery, and then some selfies of me with the ironic signage just for extra laughs in the delivery meeting. And at this point, I'd kind of had to play around and done some stuff, and it was sort of I'd achieved all I'd set out to, and it was time to hightail it and go and relieve myself of all the tea that I had drank. Great success. Turns out their security people were right. So for round two, it was Logan's turn to hunt the golden goose.
This time, took a little more hanging around in the lifts. I just basically rode them up and down. No one thought that was weird until someone chose the floor I was after. But I eventually ended up in a lift with someone going to the floor that I needed to go to. Followed David's very complex and robust playbook, tailgate, T, trouble. Remember the thing about how the secure area needed to be locked if it was unoccupied? Well, it turns out they weren't really doing that consistently either. So I found an empty goose zone. I walked on in and played Duck, Duck, Golden Goose for a quarter of an hour or so. Took some more selfies, just to prove I was there. And then left the area. So chalk another one up for the hackers.
Then we decided that if 1 cup of tea at a time is good, then 2 is definitely better. And if we're going to grab a meeting room, then why not us both go and have an actual meeting and write the report for this engagement? So using 2 consultants is often really effective because you can walk along and have an actual conversation, and this acts as a really excellent social shield. There is the risk of getting you both burnt at the same time, but with this engagement and how far we'd taken it, we were pretty confident that nobody was going to challenge us. We were just really setting out to see how far we could push it at this point.
So this attempt I call the please do the thing version. We got in a lift with someone, and sadly they didn't select the target floor.
So we're standing in the lift with this guy, and I just asked him. I was just like, "Hey, can you get to level blah?" And he shrugged and then tagged his access card, pressed the button. I was like, "Yeah, I can get there." Thanks, random person. So yeah, this exploited the fact that he was getting off on a floor before the target floor, and so at the point that he got out of the lift, we were no longer his problem. Out of sight, out of mind, somebody else's problem.
And thus we arrived on the target floor. But it was a slightly quiet time of day. There wasn't a lot of foot traffic, and so there was nobody to tailgate. And then after using the stand around forlornly technique unsuccessfully, David here threw caution to the wind. He went full Leroy Jenkins and went over and tapped gently on the glass. Helpfully, someone came and let us in. Then they just walked off. Fully expecting to be challenged, as this was the first time we'd kind of interacted with one of these goose humans. David just ummed and ahed a bit and just a lot of other things. You've got to be polite. Always thank the person that goes out of their way to help you compromise the organisation. So after making a cup of tea and holding the planning meeting, I headed off to the goose zone once more. And this time the office was occupied, and it was occupied by one of my personal nightmares, an extremely friendly extrovert who wanted to trade life stories with me. Having not really developed a pretext, because we weren't allowed to, not really wanting to social engineer the heck out of this person, I ended up just telling him a whole lot of half-truths. It was not good. But it seemed to satisfy them. And then I went to wake up the golden egg polisher, and I found that, strangely, it had no power. And this was because my newfound best friend had unplugged it to charge his cell phone. And they were mortified, both because I think you weren't meant to have cell phones in the first place or something like that, but also that inconvenienced me, and soon became my very best friend when I showed them that there was like a set of extra sneaky PowerPoints under the desk. So they really liked me. And they liked me to the point that when my credentials mysteriously wouldn't work, which may have had something to do with me not working there and not having any credentials, they volunteered to let me use theirs. There are some advantages to befriending an extrovert.
So this was fantastic, and but sadly, very sadly, it was well outside the scope of this engagement and was likely to get us in trouble down the road later. Also, it feels bad, man, when you know how slammed that your new best friend is going to get by the security team when they find out that they logged on a random onto the goose node. Yeah. So also at this point, I thought it would be appropriate to point out that we'd never actually identify individuals in an engagement because if there's a failing of an individual, then really it's the failing of the organisation to not empower the individual or have appropriate policy for them and all those other good things. So I guess the trade-off was that in this environment, due to the nature of some of the access control stuff that they had around it, they also possibly would have been able to identify the individual, so we were quite careful about how we reported on this.
And we really can't emphasise this part enough. Even though sometimes individuals do some pretty out there stuff, we just catalogued a few of them right now, that helps you compromise them, it's because, as Dave said, they haven't been empowered by the organisation to protect themselves from awful people like us. Or it may be that the organisation's overall security culture is such that these kinds of behaviours have just become the norm and are accepted. And the responsibility lies with the organisation as a whole. And we make a point of never singling individuals out unless we want them to be recognised for, kicking us out of the building.
So after thoroughly poning the Golden Goose Zone, high fives all around, it was time to let loose on the Goose support staff themselves. These good folks worked on multiple floors in a totally different building that was shared, all with access cards and as much security dust as management could sprinkle all over the place. Given that this was a bit of a secondary target for the customer, we'd only been told what floors they occupied and roughly where the lunch areas were and stuff like that. So, but they'd asked us basically to go hard with the 360 no scope that we'd been given.
The plan was to tailgate in with the lifts up to the target floors and hope that the lift we got in actually had someone from the target company, not one of the many other tenants in this building. And did we mention how unsophisticated this was? It was like so many of these attempts are just like, come on! So the next part would be to hang out in their lunch area that we were hoping that we could find. And fortunately, this turned out to be really straightforward, and soon I was steeping my stolen tea in a nearby breakout area with a cheesy grin over here. We also found out that in this building they hot desk a lot and nobody knew anybody else, so you can just sit down pretty much anywhere you like and plug a laptop in and pretend to do the things because we weren't actually allowed to attack the network. And nobody actually knows anybody else, so that's apparently fine.
So having gained access to one floor, we went for some horizontal privilege escalation. Well, actually, it was diagonal privilege escalation because they had several floors in this building, right? And they had diagonal stairwells crisscrossing between all the levels. And also the lifts were really slow, so the staff, the Goose staff, they commonly used the stairwells to get between buildings. To get between floors. So the method we used was basically to have both of us enter the stairwell at the same time and then race to see who was the first person who could successfully tailgate up onto the next floor.
And we just loop around the other person and effective. And the tailgating method we used was you either wait right by the door, almost so it hits you, as if you're about to open it yourself, or maybe a couple of steps back from the landing in this awkward mid-stride. So that as soon as someone exits the floor, you're just right there in their face and you just, oh thanks, and just slide past them. And the obvious implication is that you're just on your way from another floor and you're meant to be there and you had an access card, but thanks for opening the door for me. You have to listen carefully for other people using the stairs coming up and down from other stairs, from other levels, so that you're not just mysteriously doing your Department of Funny walks in the middle of their stairwell. If someone comes your way from another floor, you just quickly do a U-turn or whatever and just go past them and just make it appear that you're going up and down the stairs. If you try and awkwardly go with them, that's kind of strange.
So a couple of floors later and several too many cups of tea, we found a group of maybe 40 people having a bit of a celebratory shared lunch. It was a Easter morning tea. So at this point we sort of had little left to lose and we'd already achieved like literally everything we had set out to, and it meant nothing if we happened to get burnt by like these 40 people enjoying some Easter eggs. So we sort of sat down and helped ourselves to some of their sweet Easter chocolate and joined in on the festivities.
And we busted it. Wow. Just blew me away. So sometime later, we delivered the report to a meeting room, ironically one that we'd spent a fair bit of time in previously, full of some fairly high-level management types. There were some quite literal, wide-eyed, jaw-dropping moments as we went through all the gory details of the ease with which we had purloined the gilded plumage.
A real highlight was when one of the executives said that they were feeling physically ill, because that's really the kind of service that we want to offer to them, making people want to chunder on their shiny shoes.
At least they appreciated the gravity of the situation, and in all seriousness, this organisation was having to face some really hard truths about their physical security posture. And what was nice to see, while they were all staring daggers at the people who may have actually been responsible, they didn't want to blame individuals, and they recognised that good security in an organisation is primarily a cultural issue, and that change has to come from the leadership, it has to come down from the top. And the output of this engagement has actually been some really meaningful change in the organisation's security awareness and their procedures, which, unlike spewing on your shoes, is the actual goal.
So to surmise a few of the things that we can take away from this engagement. The biggest one is that really basic techniques can be an incredibly effective way of getting into an organisation. If they are well executed and if the target is of low sophistication or weak. You just sort of need to look like an everyday person going about their business, and you become invisible in a lot of situations. Obviously this won't work in really high security aware organisations, and you might have the VP of security turn you away at the front door. But if you're red teaming with one of them and the scope is as limited as ours was for this engagement, and something's kind of gone really wrong and somebody needs to reevaluate their threat model.
And this engagement really drove home the importance of the recon phase for me. I'm a big fan of comprehensive recon. Be it OSINT or actually having a bit of a nosy around. I like to know a whole lot about the organisation and their building before I walk through the door. A proper recon phase on this job may have taught us where the teacups really were, so we weren't wandering around the kitchen for ages. The actual internal layout of the office, because their blueprint didn't match. And the fact that the fire exit could only be exited with this white card, or when Dave helps you get out. And no amount of on-paper stuff provided by the client was ever going to replace just having a good old-fashioned sort of rummage around the facility. Although high-res Google Maps imagery is, kind of a nice thing to have.
Yeah, and finally, turn off the shutter on your camera, on your mobile phone, especially if you're trying to take surreptitious photos in a really small meeting room with another person sitting just a metre away from you. I'm not really sure how I got away with that one, but it worked all out in the end.
Cool. Any questions? We've got some time. That was somewhat expected. So yeah, shoot questions. Anybody?
If you've got a client that's come to you, obviously they're wanting to do some type of security analysis. As you as sort of the service provider, what's the interest from your point of view if they've just closed down your scope? Because at least in their mind, if you get busted on the first day, you just reinforce the false policy for them, so you're not doing your job. How do you balance that? And which jobs you take and don't take based on scope?
You go.
I'll shoot first, and then Dave can disagree. So it's a very difficult balancing act between you don't want to turn work away and
particularly when it's potentially really interesting.
Yeah, and you want to be able to tailor the package to meet what the customer is looking for. But as with any security testing, sometimes there can come a point where it's like, look, I don't want to put my name on a report that says everything's great when we all know it's not. And then you start to wonder about, what are they going to do with this report? Are they going to take it to a bunch of shareholders or potential customers of theirs and be like, hey, this guy's came and did the things and we're awesome. It's really challenging. Often we'll have that conversation with them and try and move them up into the more complex attacks, because while they might be less likely, they're still possible. So.
Yeah, and I guess the thing is, when people come with sort of those kinds of questions where they're like, hey, we want you to do a job, but we don't want you to actually be there. We just want you to wave your hands and tell us that everything's all good. Then they probably haven't really done their threat model well either, so they don't actually know what kinds of attacks they're trying to protect against. Because it literally might be that they have some expensive equipment that is easy to walk away with, and they think that, oh, okay, we've got some badge access on the door, so we don't really need anybody to come and test that. It's not possible for Logan and myself to stroll in and walk off with the expensive goose nest machinery. But yeah, it varies, and it is, like you said, a difficult balance that's fought. And I think sometimes we can take the stance of doing the limited scope engagement to demonstrate that basically they were a turd, and you use that as an opportunity to explain to them that maybe they do need to reevaluate some of their assumptions and do some more complicated work later. But I guess the other thing is that you just caveat the shit out of the report so that it's very clear of basically what the limitations were.
Anyone else? Down the back.
Do you find the ridiculousness of disengagements change the way you approached real?
Yes, absolutely. So the more normal playbook, and if anyone from KiwiCon's out there, then hey, let me talk at your con and I'll talk about it some more. And, we start off incredibly sneaky, really covert, middle of the night, door manipulation, things like that, and try and get enough to write a report, enough to deliver value to the client, and at that point, if we do get busted, it's way less of an issue. And then that's when often we'll just ramp it up and just see what we can get away with. And I'd say maybe 70% of these engagements have culminated in someone just walking in and just sitting there and being like, I mean, we had one consultant work for 6 hours from the client's office. He just sat there.
He was trusted employee Kapoor. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, by the time he left, they'd given him a swipe card because he had to keep getting people to let him in when he was in the bathroom. It was quite incredible. We may as well put him on the payroll. Doing this engagement was really good in giving me that just confidence that when you go in with even a slightly better social engineering pretext, when you've done your homework, when your recon's good, all that kind of stuff, just giving you that way more confidence that you won't get busted. And when you have that confidence, you don't look shady. It's so much easier to pretend that you're meant to be there. And if it does come down to it, to just stand in front of someone and lie to their face.
When you're doing your at night work, door entry, have you guys ever been picked up by police?
No. Nobody has ever called the cops on us, but we do have our get out of jail free card if that does end up happening. But you've got a story.
I'll share a anecdote here. Not cops nor private security companies. One engagement we did, one of our guys had got in and hidden their toilet. It's a very standard thing we do. We do a whole lot. And it got access to a hidden prox tag and read it, and so he had the data on his laptop. And we went to write it to a tag, and there's tags, the T5577s that we write them to, if you stuff up the right, or if the prox mark has a bit of a bad time, you brick the card. So we didn't have a spare with us because unprepared. So we were pretty much stuck with having to emulate using the prox mark. And this particular prox mark has been out in the field and it's been mushed in the laptop bags and that kind of thing. The connectors on it are super touchy. And what this meant was that to go and emulate this prox card to their car park access reader, two consultants, it's 2:30 in the morning, in this building car park, my colleague had his MacBook there, and he's like holding the connector in on one side, and I'm standing beside him holding the Proxmark in one hand and the antenna in the other, and we did this like great crab shuffle through the car park over to the reader, like, Dook. And then we knew there were like 2 more readers, so we just. And I really hoped that the client went back and checked the CCTV footage afterwards, and like, we got owned by this. But the best part about this was during this, while we were doing this, 3 private security company cars just drove past, and there's 2 dudes doing like the crab shuffle with a laptop at 2:30 in the morning. Like, you know, I suppose they're like, they don't have a crowbar. They just keep on going. Yeah, I don't know. I think they're not paid enough to care.
Is it the private security for the client, or?
Not 100% sure. That again on that engagement. We took that client prox card and we went to their server and door and tried it on that, and we found out later that the building management company / linked into the security company saw a failed read on the server and door at 2:30 in the morning and went, that's weird. And just like, they did actually block that card, so someone came to work the next morning and tried that card and it didn't work. So they went to the receptionist, and the receptionist got like, you know, gave them the spare card, and then we tried that, and that didn't work because we had tried that on the server and all the night before. So, accidental sludge and a lot of service, but that happened. Anybody else? Cool, we're actually almost close to the time we were supposed to occupy, so that's good. Thanks very much.
Yeah, so we are especially grateful. No, I won't read that out. You guys are the real MVPs. We appreciate all of you who let us into your offices, and not you guys obviously, but people who let us into the offices. But also thanks for showing up for our talk.
Yeah, and as per up there, if you do see us wandering around your building at some point in the future, you know, maybe like a knowing wink, and then please pretend we're not there.
Yeah, that has happened actually. Run into a friend on an engagement, you have to be like, bro, can you just pretend you didn't know me? Yeah, so also big shout out to the Aura team. It's nice, I can't actually see Marty wherever he is, he better be in here. Hey Marty. It's nice to come over for a conference here rather than having Marty fly over and come hang out with us, so that's cool. But also a big shout out to Team Aura as well.
And last of all, Twitter follows make us feel warm and fuzzy like a stolen cup of tea. So, you know, we've got some handles up there, but really we just do, you know.
Very unopinionated people.
Yeah. Cool.
Cheers, right, thanks guys.